Frog creature. Beyond the castle's outer walls, the landscape began to change. The manicured gardens and neatly trimmed hedges gave way to wildflower meadows, vibrant with bursts of colour, poppies, lupines and clover swaying in the gentle morning breeze. Long stretches of golden grass, shimmering under the early sun, undulated like waves across a serene sea. Birds chirped half-heartedly, their songs tentative, as if sensing an unseen shift in the air. The scent of damp earth lingered rich and loamy, laced with the faint sweetness of blooming flora. The dirt road, once smooth and well-kept, turned to gravel, its surface scattered with loose stones, then to hardened ruts carved by countless wagon wheels of old, etched deep into the earth like scars of forgotten journeys. We had only travelled a few miles when I demanded we stop. Ogleflow let go of Thistle's head, his hands firm but gentle as he helped me down off the donkey's shaggy back, my boots sinking slightly into the soft, dew-kissed ground. "I can't wear all this stupid stuff," I said in a huff, frustration boiling over. I threw my shield and spear to the ground, the metal clanging sharply against the earth, and removed my belt with its twin daggers and their leather sheaths. Then I proceeded to rip off my armor piece by piece. Greaves, vambraces and breastplate falling in a discordant heap, glinting dully in the sunlight. "I don't want to do this," I shouted as I threw the last piece to the ground, my voice echoing across the open meadow. I plonked myself on the ground and began to sulk, arms crossed tightly, staring at the swaying grasses. Thistle came and sat next to me, his warm, furry bulk pressing against my side, a quiet anchor in my storm. I put my arm around his neck, feeling the coarse texture of his mane, and we hugged for a few minutes. His steady breathing calmed my racing heart, and I felt myself become calmer, more relaxed, the tension melting away. Animals have beautiful souls. They really do, I thought. Their presence a balm to human turmoil. I looked at Ogleflow, his colourful face patient under his top hat, and asked, "When will this end?" "I'm tired of these adventures. I'm not getting anywhere. It feels like I'm going in circles." "We are at the point of decision, young fun," he replied, his voice steady yet infused with quiet wisdom. "Do we move forward, or do we give up? When you climb a mountain, the higher you go, the harder it gets. Oh, but if you make it to the top, all thoughts of hardship disappear, and you would bask in the glory of your achievement. Do you really want to give up now we have come all this way?" I picked a stone off the ground, its smooth surface cool against my palm, and played with it while I thought about Ogleflow's words, rolling it between my fingers as my mind churned. "It's not that I'm tired so much as I feel like this is all for other people," I said, my voice softer, tinged with frustration. "It doesn't seem to be about me at all. I feel like I'm being played with. Used." "You are being used, young fun." Ogleflow's reply took me by surprise, his tone sharp with truth. "What do you mean?" I asked, my brow furrowing. "You are being used by ruthless young fun," he explained, his eyes piercing. "The more you see yourself as a victim of circumstance, the more power you give away to him. He doesn't want you to remember that you are the creator. He will do all he can to make you give up, to surrender to his will, to stop you searching for the truth." That made me mad, a hot spark of defiance igniting within me. I didn't like being pushed around or used like I'm a toy that can be played with and then discarded at will, cast aside without thought. I got to my feet, brushing the clinging dirt from my tunic, and realized I had left my bag of tricks behind, a sudden pang of panic rising in my chest. "We have to go back, my bag of tricks," I said desperately, my voice tight. "Do you really need it still, young fun?" Ogleflow asked, his tone gentle but firm. "It's just a safety blanket. It was always empty. It was just to give you courage, to make you feel safe. That's all it ever was." I was reluctant to leave it behind, the familiar weight of it a comfort, but Ogleflow referring to it as a safety blanket made my mind up to leave it. I must admit that I did feel more vulnerable without it, a raw edge to my nerves, but I wasn't a baby anymore. Time to grow up a bit, to stand on my own 2 feet. I decided to leave the armor where it was on the ground, its weight too cumbersome for the path ahead. I took the belt with 2 daggers, their blades catching the light, the spear with its wooden shaft, And the shield, its surface smooth but sturdy. The armor was too heavy and cumbersome anyway, and who needs armor to kill a frog, I reasoned, trying to bolster my resolve. We set off again, Ogleflow leading Thistle by the head, his steps sure through the uneven terrain, and me walking beside with my arm on Thistle's back, feeling the rhythm of his stride. I felt re-energized, more determined than ever, a fire kindling in my heart. I felt good, alive with purpose. For a while the journey was peaceful. Trees flanked either side of the road like guardians of the forest, tall and ancient, their gnarled trunks cloaked in moss, their limbs arching overhead to form a leafy cathedral, filtering sunlight into a dappled glow. Light streamed through the branches in broken patterns, casting intricate shadows that danced on the forest floor. Everything seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation, as though something was about to happen. A quiet tension in the stillness. We veered off the path and found ourselves by a small crystal-clear stream, winding lazily through the undergrowth, its waters sparkling like liquid diamonds in the filtered sunlight. It sparkled like strands of silver thread, its gentle trickle providing a soothing melody against the backdrop of birdsong, a soft counterpoint to the forest's hush. The stream was narrow but deep in places, with smooth stones lining its bed, polished by years of flowing water, and tall reeds swaying softly at its banks, their tips brushing the surface. I plunged my hands into the cool water, the sharp chill against my warm skin bringing a sudden clarity to my thoughts, like a fog lifting from my mind. I cupped my hands, drank deeply, and let the water dribble down my chin, not caring if I looked like a child, the simple act grounding me in the moment. Nearby, Ogleflow sat on a fallen log, its surface softened by years of decay, his expression serene, eyes tracing the stream's path. He plucked a reed and began twisting it absently in his fingers, the motion almost meditative. "Even heroes must rest, young fun," he said with a chuckle, his voice warm with camaraderie. I laid back on the grass, its blades cool and soft beneath me, staring up at the canopy above. Sunbeams broke through in golden shafts, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. The forest smelled of damp earth, fresh leaves, and something faintly sweet. Wildflowers, perhaps, hidden somewhere nearby, their fragrance carried on the breeze. For a while, we said nothing. The silence was not awkward. It was the kind of silence that heals, a balm to the soul. Birds chirped softly above, their notes delicate, and I could hear the faint buzzing of insects drifting past, a gentle hum of life. A butterfly landed briefly on my arm, its wings a delicate tapestry of amber and shadow, then fluttered away into the dappled light. I wanted to freeze time there, to remain by that quiet stream forever, its gentle flow a lullaby. In that moment, the quest, the creature, the fear, they all seemed like distant dreams, faded and insubstantial. It was just me, the trees, the water, and the sky, a fleeting sanctuary of peace. But the moment passed, as all moments do. Ogleflow stood and put on his hat, the brim casting a shadow across his face. "Come, young fun, time to go," he said, his voice gentle but resolute. I sighed, stood, and placed my hand on Thistle's flank, feeling the warmth of his sturdy frame. The stream burbled a quiet farewell as we left the clearing and continued down the winding forest path, the memory of that tranquil stop etched forever in my heart, a touchstone of calm amidst the storm. As we pressed on, the terrain became rougher, more unpredictable, the ground uneven and treacherous. The air grew humid and heavy, clinging to my skin like a damp cloak. The sunlight was gradually strangled by thick clouds that rolled in from the east, casting the forest in a muted, oppressive gloom. Birds grew silent, their absence a palpable weight, and the woods darkened, shadows lengthening into claw-like shapes. The trees changed shape, once proud and green, now twisted and skeletal, their branches reaching out like claws, stripped of leaves and vitality. The ground became soft, too soft, yielding underfoot with a wet, sucking sound. Each step Thistle took squelched unpleasantly, and a sickly smell began to rise from the earth, sharp and acrid, like rotting vegetation. Hours passed, each one blurring into the next. The land grew quiet, oppressively so, a silence that pressed against my ears. Mist slithered along the ground, curling around my boots and thistle's legs, cold and ghostly. Insects buzzed, invisible but persistent, their drone grating on my nerves. Pools of stagnant water dotted the path now, each one reflecting the sky like a broken mirror, their surfaces oily and unnatural. The road was no longer visible, swallowed by the mire. Only instinct and the faint guidance of Ogleflow's quiet direction moved us forward, his presence a steady beacon. Finally the trees parted, and there it was. The cursed swamp land, a desolate expanse that seemed to breathe malevolence. The swamp stretched for miles in every direction, its dark, almost black water coated in a film of green slime that shimmered sickly in the dim light. Strange plants grew thickly along the edges, wide-leaved, thorned and seemingly alive, their tendrils twitching as if sensing our presence. Gnarled trees rose from the muck like prisoners grasping for freedom, their twisted limbs draped in moss like tattered rags. Low, guttural sounds echoed from somewhere deep within the mire, unplaceable and chilling. Frogs croaked in a slow, mournful chorus, their voices heavy with sorrow. The air stank of rot and decay, thick and suffocating, and the ground itself seemed to pulse beneath them, alive with some ancient, sinister force. It was a place of nightmares, where light and hope seemed to wither under the weight of despair. Listening to all the frogs in the swamp, it suddenly dawned on me that the frog creature is not just a frog. After all, it was big enough to wear the prince's crown, a detail that now loomed ominously. I found myself wishing I had kept the armor, its weight a small price for protection against such a foe. I asked Ogleflow, my voice tight with unease, "How big do you think this frog creature is?" "Remember, young Fun, the prince never returned," he said with a slight nervousness to his voice, his eyes flickering with concern. I don't think he was worried about himself. He was worried for me. After all, it was me who had to kill the frog creature, a responsibility that now felt like a lead weight in my chest. The forest gave way gradually, the tall, noble trees thinning out and becoming gnarled and twisted, their bark darkened and mottled like diseased skin, rough and peeling under the faint light. The sunlight, once warm and dappled, struggled to reach the ground now, filtered through layers of mist and vine-choked branches, casting a sickly pallor over the landscape. The air grew thick, humid and heavy with the stench of decay, like rotting leaves soaked in stagnant water, a cloying weight that coated my throat. Each step forward became a slow, deliberate effort, the ground turning to viscous muck that clung to our boots, pulling with every movement as if reluctant to release us. Patches of standing water shimmered with oily rainbows, disturbed only by the slow, lazy drift of water insects and the occasional ripple, always unexplained, always unsettling, sending a prickle down my spine. The ground was littered with tangled roots and hidden holes that threatened to twist an ankle or worse, each step a gamble. Sweat poured down my back, my tunic clinging uncomfortably, and my breath came in shallow, cautious gulps, as if the air might turn toxic. The sounds were strange, unnatural. Frogs croaked in low, guttural tones like distant drums, a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the earth. Insects buzzed with a pitch that bordered on maddening, grating against my nerves. Somewhere, always just beyond sight, faint noises, splashes, rustles hinted at movement, stirring the mist. The trees here leaned inward, as if whispering secrets to one another, their branches swaying without wind. Moss draped from their limbs like torn rags, and their trunks were warped, covered in strange fungi that glowed faintly in the gloom, casting an eerie, otherworldly light. Every now and then, a bird would shriek. Not in song, but in alarm, its cry cutting through the stillness like a blade. Thistle, brave as he had been, balked, his ears twitching nervously, his hooves sinking deep into the soft ground, reluctant to move forward. Ogleflow took the reins and led him slowly, patiently, whispering to him in a language I didn't know, his voice a soothing murmur against the swamp's discord. I stayed close behind, spear in hand, my heart thudding, each beat loud in my ears. The mist thickened as we moved deeper, curling around us like ghostly fingers, cold and clammy against my skin. Shapes seemed to move in the distance, low figures slithering just out of sight, or shadows flitting between the trees, vanishing when I turned to look. I blinked constantly, unsure whether I was truly seeing anything or if the swamp was playing tricks on my mind, weaving illusions from fear and fatigue. Even my thoughts felt fogged, dulled by the oppressive atmosphere, sluggish and heavy. At one point, we had to cross a narrow causeway of stone and root that spanned a dark pool, its surface unnaturally still, like a mirror to a dead world. The water beneath was calm but not peaceful, too still, hiding secrets. As I stepped across, I could see strange things beneath the surface. Bones, indistinct faces, things that looked like eyes opening and closing slowly in the depths, their gaze following me. I tried not to look again, my stomach churning with dread, focusing on the uneven path ahead. Time felt warped in the swamp, minutes stretching into hours, hours into eternities. It was impossible to tell how long we'd been walking, the oppressive silence broken only by a distant wail or the sound of something crashing through the reeds far off, each sound a jolt to my frayed nerves. I didn't ask what made those sounds. I didn't want to know, the possibilities too grim to contemplate. Ogleflow moved forward with purpose but remained quiet, his usual chatter replaced by a focused silence. For once, I was glad he wasn't talking, grateful for the chance to focus on keeping my feet, on not falling, on not letting my imagination turn every branch into a claw or every splash into an approaching monster. Eventually, as the mist began to thin and the air grew cooler, I realized we were nearing the heart of the swamp. And whatever waited there, whatever this cursed place had been hiding, we were about to face it, a reckoning I could no longer avoid. The heart of the swamp revealed itself not with grandeur, but with a creeping sense of inevitability, a slow unveiling of dread. The mist thinned just enough to reveal a clearing, or rather a hollow sunken patch of land encircled by looming skeletal trees, their roots twisting like petrified snakes over and around one another, forming a tangled perimeter that seemed to guard what lay within. At the center, a stagnant black pool, its water still and reflective, yet somehow seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it, a void that swallowed all warmth. Nothing about it felt natural, its presence an affront to the living world. All around, the swamp fell into a deep hush, an absolute silence that pressed against my ears. The frogs silenced, their mournful chorus cut off abruptly. The buzzing of insects ceased, leaving an eerie void. Even Thistle's breath became shallow and cautious, his eyes wide and alert. A strange pressure settled over us, like the air had thickened further, heavy with the weight of ancient, unspoken things, secrets buried in the mire. The further we pressed into the heart of the swamp, the more distorted the world became. Time seemed to lag, each moment stretching unnaturally, sound dulled to a muffled hum, and even Thistle moved with hesitation, as though the very ground resented our presence, pushing back against our intrusion. Then, just as the path grew nearly impassable, sinking beneath sludge and twisted roots, the trees began to thin, and an unexpected clarity emerged through the mist, sharp and surreal. There, rising from the mire like a dream or a memory half-remembered, stood a palace, its form both majestic and menacing. It was unlike the regal white stone of the castle on the hill, pristine and proud. This palace was made of black marble and deep green stone, slick with moss and ivy that clung like a living shroud, as though it had grown out of the swamp itself rather than being built upon it, rooted in the decay. Its towers twisted upward in impossible spirals, some leaning unnaturally, defying gravity, others ending in jagged spires that pierced the low-hanging clouds, dark and foreboding. The walls shimmered faintly, not with light, but with a sheen of moisture and enchantment, like oil on water, shifting in hues of green and violet. It breathed a quiet menace, beautiful in its own terrible way, a monument to forgotten power. A moat of dark water surrounded the palace, thick with lilies the color of bruises, their petals heavy and drooping, and reeds that whispered when the wind passed, their voices soft and eerie. There was no drawbridge, just a narrow stone archway that spanned the water, half broken, its surface worn smooth by time, yet still passable, a fragile bridge to the unknown. Carvings lined the outer walls, figures writhing in torment, their stone faces frozen in anguish. Regal faces twisted into grotesque masks of grief, their eyes hollow and accusing. The central gate bore the shape of a great frog's open mouth, fangs protruding where there should be none. Sharp and gleaming, as if to swallow those who dared to enter, a portal to a nightmare. Despite the dread curling in my gut, a cold knot of fear, I couldn't help but be drawn in. The palace felt familiar, like a place I had seen before in a dream, or a nightmare I had long forgotten, buried deep in my subconscious. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming, and with it came an emotion I couldn't name, not fear, but sorrow, a deep soul-shaking sorrow that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. At the far side of the pool, half submerged in mud and shadow, stood the ruins of a stone altar, its surface weathered and cracked, choked by vines that seemed to strangle it with possessive intent. Carved symbols, some recognizably ancient, others seemingly alien, their shapes sharp and unfamiliar, peeked through the overgrowth, faint but enduring. And there on the altar sat a crown, unmistakably regal, though dulled by age. Gold, tarnished by time, and something far darker, gleamed faintly beneath a film of swamp filth, its jewels muted but still catching the dim light. And resting just behind it was movement, subtle but deliberate. At first, I thought it was a pile of wet, rotted fabric, sodden and lifeless. But then it shifted, slowly, purposefully, rising with an eerie grace. A pair of bulging yellow eyes opened, lidless and shining with cold intelligence, their gaze piercing through the gloom. The creature's form uncurled, humanoid in shape, but grotesquely distorted, a mockery of life. Its skin was warty and slick, like an amphibian's, mottled green and grey, hanging in folds over a thick, bloated body that seemed to pulse faintly. Its limbs were long and sinewy, ending in clawed hands and webbed feet, each movement deliberate and menacing. And atop its head, balanced mockingly between the wide, quivering eyes, was another crown, its gold bright against the creature's grotesque form. The prince's crown, a symbol of lost nobility, now worn as a taunt. Ogleflow stepped in front of me, not in defense, but as if to shield me from panic, his presence a steady anchor as my breath caught in my throat. I took a step forward, heart pounding in my chest, sweat clinging to my neck, the damp air making my skin clammy, spear trembling in my grip, its weight suddenly unfamiliar. The creature regarded me with an eerie stillness, its eyes unblinking, locked onto mine. It didn't charge, it didn't hiss. It just stared, as if it knew me, as if it had been waiting for me all along, patient and inevitable. And in that awful silence, a memory stirred, faint but insistent. A memory not from this world, but from deep within myself. A glimpse of a boy, staring into a mirror, wishing to be something more. And something else answering, a shadow behind the glass. The creature moved toward us, slow and deliberate, sizing us up with those unyielding eyes. My knees were trembling, my teeth were chattering, a cold fear gripping me. I could feel my courage flee as I stood, frozen with fear, the spear slipping from my grasp, clattering to the ground alongside my shield. I turned and ran, my boots slipping in the mud, bumping straight into Thistle, who was running the other way, heading for the palace entrance, his hooves pounding with urgency. Somehow I ended up on his back, facing the wrong way, clinging desperately as he galloped forward. I looked back to see Ogleflow engage in battle with the frog creature, his movements swift and precise, as Thistle and I made our escape, the palace's shadow swallowing us. The palace interior was a paradox of splendor and decay, as if grandeur had once lived here but now slept under layers of rot and ruin, a faded echo of its former glory. The moment I crossed the threshold, a heavy silence pressed in on me, muffling every sound but the faint slosh of water that still seeped in through cracks in the marble floor, pooling in dark, reflective patches. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something older, an ancient damp musk that clung to the walls like ghosts too tired to leave, a weight of forgotten years. The entrance hall rose high above my head, a cavernous space whose vaulted ceiling disappeared into shadow, its edges lost in darkness. Once it must have been magnificent, a testament to royal power. Tattered silk banners still hung from corroded iron rods, their colors faded to hues of ash and bone, swaying faintly as if stirred by an unseen breath. A grand chandelier of rusted iron and cracked crystal loomed above, its light long extinguished, its arms twisted like skeletal fingers. Thin vines crept up the marble pillars like skeletal fingers, twisting in and out of the ornate carvings, coiling through ivy-etched stonework and gargoyle reliefs that stared down with hollow, sightless eyes, their expressions frozen in silent judgment. The floor was a patchwork of broken tiles and blackened water stains, its surface uneven underfoot. Here and there, fragments of once beautiful mosaics showed glimpses of a forgotten time. Golden suns, blooming lotuses, crescent moons. But most were obscured or fractured, their stories lost to time. The sound of dripping echoed endlessly, droplets falling from unseen places, striking the stone like faint clock ticks, counting down to something unknowable, a rhythm that set my nerves on edge. Tall, narrow doorways led deeper into the palace, each arched frame warped and weather-worn, their wood swollen with moisture. Beyond them, dim corridors unfurled like veins, twisting into chambers heavy with mold and memory, their walls slick with condensation. Dust floated thick in the stale air, turning the feeble shafts of light into golden smoke, swirling in lazy patterns. Broken statues lined the walls, their faces chipped or missing, their forms leaning awkwardly, as though even the stone had grown weary of standing guard, burdened by centuries of neglect. In the great hall, the remnants of a long banquet table stretched into darkness, its wood bowed in the center, buckled by time and rot, its surface scarred and uneven. High-backed chairs, carved from black wood and upholstered in tattered velvet, stood crookedly around it. Some toppled, some half submerged in stagnant water that pooled on the floor. Moss crept up their legs, reclaiming them slowly, inch by inch, a silent conquest. The throne, if it could still be called that, stood at the far end of the hall on a raised dais, a monstrosity of iron and bone wrapped in a tapestry of cobwebs and shadow. Its back reached high like the spines of a serpent, jagged and menacing, and it looked less like a seat of power and more like a cage, designed to trap rather than elevate. The space around it felt colder, darker, as if the very air resisted encroachment, pushing back against any who approached. It was not a place for kings or queens. It was a tomb for pride, a palace of echoes and things forgotten, where glory had long since crumbled to dust. And yet, something watched. From somewhere behind the silence, from cracks in the walls or depths beneath the floor, I felt it. A weight of unseen eyes, an ancient presence, waiting, patient, and still very much alive, its gaze prickling the back of my neck. I looked back out the entrance, my heart sinking. Ogleflow was engaged in a desperate struggle with the frog creature, their forms locked in a dance of survival, shadows clashing in the dim light. I felt ashamed, leaving him to fight alone when it was my job to kill the creature, my duty as the one chosen for this quest. The battle was intense as Ogleflow and the creature battled for supremacy, each blow a testament to their resolve. I felt I had to help and made ready to charge, summoning what courage I had left, my hand tightening around my dagger. But as I stepped forward, Ogleflow saw me, his eyes flashing with urgency. "Free the princess, young fun," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. I turned to Thistle, and I don't know why, but I said, "Find the princess," like I was asking a dog to fetch a ball, the words tumbling out in desperation. Suddenly his ears pricked up, and he started to head deeper into the palace, his hooves echoing with purpose. I followed, not knowing what else to do, my heart pounding as we plunged into the unknown. Thistle darted ahead without looking back, slipping between the doors into the dimness beyond, his shaggy form a fleeting shadow in the gloom. "Thistle, wait," I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the dense, humid air, muffled by the palace's oppressive weight. I pushed forward, the doors groaning behind me as they creaked open wider, their hinges rusted and protesting. The moment I entered, the smell hit me like a wall, wet decay, stagnant water, and the strange tang of rusted metal, sharp and metallic. The darkness pressed in around me, heavy and suffocating, but Thistle was already a flicker of movement far ahead, his silhouette darting past fractured pillars and beneath the broken ribs of a collapsed archway, his path unerring. The inside of the palace was colder than the swamp, but it wasn't a natural cold. It felt hollow, as if the building had been drained of warmth, of time, of purpose, its essence leached away. My footsteps echoed loudly, their sound distorted by the damp bouncing off the walls in uneven waves. "Thistle," I called again, rounding a corner into a side corridor, my breath catching as the air grew thicker. There I saw him, standing still now, staring through a warped, broken iron gate at the end of a short hall. Green-blue light shimmered faintly from within the room beyond it, casting shadows that danced across the cracked stone walls like writhing hands, their movements eerie and alive. "What is it?" I whispered as I approached, my voice barely audible. Thistle didn't respond. He just stepped aside, eyes wide with focus, his gaze fixed on the chamber ahead. I peered through the bars, my breath catching. Inside, the room was a strange fusion of chamber and prison, its walls slick with moisture and moss. Moss-coated tiles led up to a circular dais sunk slightly into the floor, its surface uneven and worn. Around it, rusted chains hung from brackets embedded deep into the stone walls, their links corroded and brittle. Vines had slithered their way through cracks, creeping toward the center as if curious, or reverent, drawn to what lay within. And there, bound and motionless, was Thunderbolt, the legendary stallion of countless tales. The stallion stood in the center of the dais, his massive muscular frame held upright by an unnatural force, his presence both majestic and tragic. Bands of glowing vines twisted around his limbs and torso, not digging in like shackles, but pulsing faintly with a soft, unnatural light, restraining him, holding him like threads of moonlight turned solid, their glow casting eerie patterns on the walls. His mane, once brilliant and windswept, hung damp and tangled over his eyes, matted with swamp filth, and his sides rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths, each one a struggle. His hooves hovered just inches above the floor, twitching occasionally as if caught mid-gallop in a nightmare, a prisoner of some cruel enchantment. "Thunderbolt," I breathed, stepping forward, gritting my teeth at the sight of this once proud champion rendered powerless, his strength sapped by the vine's cruel embrace. A soft sound escaped Thunderbolt, half groan, half snort, as he stirred, his eyes fluttering open, heavy with exhaustion. They locked with Thistle's across the chamber, and in that glance I saw recognition, relief, and a deep, unspoken pain, a bond forged in shared trials. I had to free him. I didn't know how, my mind racing for a plan. But I knew this wasn't just imprisonment, it was sacrifice. Thunderbolt wasn't being contained. He was being drained, his life force siphoned by some unseen force within the palace. And something deeper in the palace had to be behind it, a malevolent will orchestrating this torment. "Stay close, Thistle," I said grimly, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. "We're getting him out." I'd heard stories about Thunderbolt at the celebrations after my knighthood, tales spun by firelight of his unmatched power. They said he could cleave a man in two with the stomp of his hooves, that no beast could outrun him, no knight could ride him unless he allowed it, his spirit as fierce as his strength. So, standing there in that cursed, root-choked chamber, staring at a once mighty warhorse limp and suspended in a cocoon of writhing vines, it took me a moment to believe what I was seeing, to reconcile the legend with the broken figure before me. That was him, Thunderbolt, weathered, trembling, half-starved, but unmistakably him, his presence still commanding despite his plight. Thistle snorted beside me, his shaggy head tilting toward the ceiling as if to say, "Well, don't just stand there," his impatience clear in his stance. I didn't expect a talking donkey, and Thistle wasn't one, but he didn't need words. He made himself clear, his urgency spurring me to action. I stepped forward, each boot squelching in the mossy floor, the sound loud in the oppressive silence, and drew my knife, its blade glinting faintly in the eerie light. The vines recoiled like they could sense the blade, their movements sluggish but alive. The green light in the walls pulsed, angry now, the chamber itself seeming to resent my intrusion. Hold still, I muttered, reaching up, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Thunderbolt's eyes rolled toward me, dull but watchful, a spark of his old fire still burning. I slashed through one vine, then another, the fibrous strands parting with a wet snap. They snapped back like severed snakes, writhing in protest. Thunderbolt let out a deep, ragged breath and slumped as I cut the final bindings, his massive frame sagging. I threw my shoulder under his chest, muscles straining, and tried to steady him as he landed with a jarring thud, the impact reverberating through the chamber. He shook like a dog, throwing off bits of dead bark and dust, his movements stiff but determined. His legs wobbled, but he remained standing, his strength returning in faint surges. Thunderbolt, the horse from Legends. Alive, defiant despite his ordeal. The room didn't like that, its atmosphere shifting to one of malice. The walls shuddered, a low groan echoing through the stone. The vines lashed out, writhing along the ground like blind serpents, their movements frantic. One struck near my foot, thudding the moss with a dull impact. Another wrapped around Thunderbolt's hind leg, and Thistle kicked it clean off, the crack echoing like a whip in the confined space. "Time to go," I yelled, adrenaline surging through me. We ran, the chamber's wrath chasing us. Thunderbolt stumbled at first, but regained his strength with terrifying speed, his hooves pounding the slick floor. I barely had time to vault onto his back, gripping his mane before he lunged forward through the twisting corridor, his movements fluid and powerful. Thistle galloped beside us, hooves thudding on the slick floor, his ears pinned flat in fierce determination, a small but indomitable force. Vines crashed down from the ceiling, trying to block our escape, their fibrous lengths whipping through the air, but they missed us by inches. Thunderbolt ducked and wove like he remembered this place and hated it, his every movement fueled by a burning need to escape. We burst through the outer arch, back into the swamp's grey twilight, the air heavy but freer than the palace's stifling grip. But we didn't stop, our momentum carrying us forward, because we hadn't come just for Thunderbolt. The princess was still trapped, and the dungeons were waiting, their shadows beckoning. Thunderbolt skidded to a halt near the outer hall, his sides heaving. I slid off, my legs unsteady, and turned to Thistle, my breath ragged. "The dungeons?" I asked, breathless, hoping for guidance. Thistle didn't nod. He just turned and started trotting toward a stone passage, half swallowed by roots and shadow, his path unerring. That was all the answer I needed, his certainty bolstering my own. Thunderbolt followed without protest, his strength returning with each step, his eyes sharp and alert. I'd never met a princess, my knowledge of her limited to whispered tales. I didn't even know if the stories were true. If she was still alive down there beneath the palace, under all that weight of sorrow and rot, a prisoner of time and enchantment. But I knew we weren't leaving without her, a resolve that burned brighter than my fear. The entrance to the dungeons was half collapsed and thick with roots, like the forest itself was trying to bury the past, sealing it away from the world. Thistle led the way, his hooves surprisingly silent on the slick stone, his movements cautious but purposeful. Thunderbolt, strong again but watchful, followed close behind, his massive frame filling the narrow passage. I brought up the rear, gripping my knife tighter with every step, its familiar weight a small comfort. The air changed as we descended, growing colder, heavier, like walking into the lungs of something ancient and wounded, each breath a struggle against the oppressive weight. The torch I'd grabbed from the wall sputtered but held, its glow barely touching the surrounding dark, casting long, flickering shadows. Its light was enough to make out the worn carvings on the walls. Vines, thorns, and a crown shattered in two, their edges softened by time but still sharp with meaning. "She's real," I whispered, mostly to myself, the words a quiet affirmation. The princess, the last light of the kingdom, a figure of legend. I didn't know her name, only that she'd vanished when the swamp began to spread, swallowed by this place, her fate tied to its curse. We reached the bottom of the stairs, the air growing colder still. The corridor stretched ahead in crooked angles, lined with rusted cell doors and scattered bones, their shapes indistinct in the dim light. Water dripped from above, a steady, maddening rhythm. A sound like soft weeping echoed faintly from deeper within, fragile and haunting, pulling at my heart. Thistle stopped, his ears twitching, alert to the sound. He turned his head toward a door barely clinging to its hinges, its iron warped and brittle. Something was behind it, the air heavy with presence. I stepped forward, heart thudding, my pulse loud in my ears. Thunderbolt lowered his head beside me, nostrils flaring, and pushed his weight against the door. It opened with a groan, revealing the chamber beyond. She was there, a figure so still she seemed part of the stone. At first I thought she was part of the room, curled into herself, shrouded in a tattered cloak the same color as the stone, blending into the shadows. But then she looked up, her movement slow and deliberate. Her eyes, hollow with exhaustion, locked onto mine, wide and searching, as if unsure of reality. "Are you real?" she asked, her voice like dry leaves, fragile and brittle, carrying the weight of endless solitude. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm Finn. We've come to get you out." Thistle brayed softly, a gentle sound, and walked up to her, nuzzling her hand with his soft muzzle. She blinked, startled, then smiled faintly, the expression transforming her face, a spark of life returning. "You brought a donkey," she said, her voice soft but warm, tinged with wonder. "He's smarter than he looks," I said, a small grin breaking through my tension, hoping to ease her fear. She stood slowly, her legs trembling, unsteady from long captivity. I caught her as she staggered, her frame light and frail, and steadied her, my arm firm but gentle. "How long—" I started, wanting to understand her ordeal, but she shook her head, her eyes pleading. "No more questions, just get me out before it comes back," she said, her voice urgent, laced with fear. My stomach clenched, a cold dread settling in. But she didn't answer, her gaze darting to the shadows as if expecting something to emerge. We made our way back through the hall, Thunderbolt lowering his body so she could climb onto his back, his strength a steady presence. She hesitated, then leaned forward, resting her cheek against his mane, her fingers curling into his coat, seeking comfort in his warmth. We climbed the stairs, the torchlight trembling, casting erratic shadows. Somewhere deep behind us, something groaned, a low, resonant sound that shook the walls, stirring the air with menace. Thistle nudged me forward, his insistence clear. I didn't need telling twice, my pace quickening. We burst into the main hall and were almost out, the promise of freedom so close when we came face to face with the creature sitting like a frog, its grotesque form hunched and still, its yellow eyes gleaming in the dim light. There was no sign of Ogleflow, the absence a heavy weight in my chest. Now that I had a princess to protect, I felt more courageous, a surge of duty overriding my fear. I leapt forward, dagger in hand, its blade flashing as I raised it high, ready to strike with all my anger and frustration, delivered with one fatal blow, the weight of every trial fueling my resolve. I screamed a warrior's scream, a raw, primal sound, and was about to strike, but the creature did not move, its stillness unnerving. It looked me straight in the eye, its gaze piercing, familiar, like a long-lost friend I couldn't place. I knew this creature. How? I didn't know, but he seemed to reach into my soul, stirring a deep, unshakable guilt. I lowered my dagger in shame, guilt tugging at my heart, the blade heavy in my hand. The princess, weakened by her ordeal, managed to shout, her voice frail but commanding, "Don't hurt him." She slid off Thunderbolt's back, her movements unsteady, and walked over to the creature, her steps deliberate despite her frailty. Before I could react, she leaned forward and kissed it, her lips brushing its warty skin. My eyes widened with surprise, and my mouth fell agape, shock rooting me to the spot. The only word I managed to say was, "What?" A strangled exclamation of disbelief. I watched, dumbfounded, as the creature morphed into something new, its grotesque form dissolving like mist. It was the prince, his features handsome and regal, his eyes warm with gratitude. I was dumbfounded, not knowing what to say or do, my mind reeling. It was like a fairy tale I once heard, a story of curses and redemption brought to life. The prince and princess hugged and kissed, their embrace radiant, and they glowed, their strength returning, a soft light emanating from them as the curse's hold shattered. As we stepped out of the palace's ruined gates, The air shifted, lighter and cleaner, as if the world itself exhaled in relief. The very light seemed to breathe again, soft and golden. Behind us, the walls of the once cursed fortress began to stir, not with menace, but renewal, a quiet awakening. I turned to look, just as the first tendrils of ivy shriveled and dropped away from the stone, crumbling to dust. The damp rot that had soaked the structure for decades began to hiss and steam, retreating like mist at sunrise, leaving the air fresher. The slime-coated stones shed their filth like dead skin, revealing intricate carvings long buried beneath decay. Twisting vines, twin lions, a crown held aloft by two doves, their details sharp and vibrant, gleaming faintly now, as though the stone itself remembered what it once was, reclaiming its dignity. The swamp recoiled around us, its waters drawing back like a tide, revealing patches of firm ground. Trees that had once slumped and twisted in sorrow now straightened, their bark firming, leaves turning from sallow yellow to deep emerald green, vibrant and alive. Frogs stopped croaking, their mournful chorus replaced by silence, then the soft trill of birds returning. Insects no longer swarmed, their oppressive buzz fading. The very air grew crisper, touched with the distant scent of jasmine and old smoke, a promise of renewal. The curse was lifting, its grip loosening with every passing moment. Windows high along the palace walls, once shattered or clogged with grime, reassembled, their shards gliding gently from where they lay in mossy corners, floating through the air to rejoin their frames with a soft chime. Stained glass reformed with a radiant hum. Scenes of the kingdom's golden age, a queen holding a newborn, a stag on a mountain, a rising sun over fields of wheat, their colours vivid and alive. Colours danced across the courtyard as the glass caught the light of a clearing sky, painting the ground in hues of sapphire, ruby and gold. Marble that had been cracked and veined with blackness began to mend, its surface smoothing as if time reversed. Golden trim reappeared along the roof's edges, gleaming brightly, and flags, tattered and long forgotten, unfurled from turrets that straightened and reached again for the heavens, snapping proudly in the breeze. They bore a crest, a flame encircled by a ring of stars, a symbol of hope reborn. Even the very ground shifted beneath our feet. What had once been sucking mud firmed, revealing cobblestones, worn smooth by time but solid, their pattern intricate and deliberate, leading from the palace gates down toward what had once been a road, now emerging clean from the mire, a path to a brighter future. And as if in answer to this transformation, the sky broke open above us, clouds parting like a curtain. A shaft of golden light pierced through, bathing the palace in radiance, its stones glowing with warmth. No longer a place of dread, it stood as a cathedral of hope, majestic and proud. The swamp was losing, its darkness retreating before the light. The palace was remembering itself, reclaiming its glory from the curse's grasp. The princess hugged and kissed Thistle, her touch gentle, then Thunderbolt, her hands lingering on his mane, then me, her embrace warm and grateful. I blushed, my cheeks heating under her gratitude. "My heroes," she said with a warm smile, her voice soft but strong, her eyes shining with tears of relief. I felt someone behind me, a familiar presence, and turned to see who it was. "Ogleflow," I shouted with glee, relief flooding through me at the sight of him, alive and whole. He hugged me, his arms strong and reassuring, and said, "I'm so proud of you, young Fun." His voice thick with emotion, his eyes bright with pride. "I don't understand," I said, confused about his battle with the creature, my mind still reeling from the day's events. "It's simple, young Fun," he explained, his smile gentle. "The creature, the prince, was trying to protect his princess bride. He thought we had come to harm her. I just had to hold him off for a short while to give you time to free her," he said, his tone light but carrying the weight of truth. The prince, a tall, handsome man, his features sharp and noble, shook my hand, his grip firm, and looked me in the eye with an expression of gratitude, his gaze steady and sincere. "You are a brave knight indeed," he said joyfully, his voice rich with warmth, his words a balm to my weary soul. Suddenly, it hit me like a ton of bricks. a realization that shook me to my core. The prince, the young man, was me, but older, his features a mirror of my own, aged by time and trials. I could see it so plainly, the lines of my face echoed in his. I had almost killed myself, my future self, in my blind fury. The thought of it made my head spin, a dizzying whirl of what-ifs and near misses. "Wait a minute," I said, my voice trembling as I tried to make sense of it all. "If the frog creature wasn't the evil presence that infected this land, then who was?" A darkness blurred my vision from the outside in, a creeping shadow that swallowed the world. Everything and everyone disappeared down a tunnel of gloom, the light fading to a pinprick. The last thing I saw was Ogleflow's outstretched hand, reaching for me, his fingers a fleeting promise of safety as the darkness claimed me.